Oh yeah, got a good one for you today. So what we've got here is a 2000 Pontiac Trans Am WS6. It is a thing of beauty, and I'm a little biased because it's my car. It's got a LS1 V8 engine. It has a bunch of bolt-ons, things like that, Borla exhaust, and it also has a little problem as of late that we are going to try to figure out in this video. Symptom: the car has what I describe as a hiccup. When you come off the line in first gear, it's got a 6-speed manual, by the way, and when you come off the line in the first gear, intermittently, 1 out of, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times, it'll just have a hiccup at maybe 15 or 20 miles an hour. Feels like a misfire, but I don't think it is. And we are going to try to diagnose what is wrong with the car. Again, no check engine light or anything. So the coder here that I have is going to be useless, and that's fine with me because this car is my baby and nobody puts baby on a coder. Gratuitous shot of extra angles of the car. But what we're going to do is head over to the drawing board, and this will be a little bit interactive. I'm going to try to make this. So come up with some ideas of what you think might be causing this problem. Again, we've got only in first gear coming off the line, off the stop, we've got what is a skip or a hiccup. The car just kind of not stalls, but just almost misses for just a brief second. It's done and good with it. The rest of the way we're fine. And again, a very intermittent problem. So that's what we're trying to think of some ideas what could cause that. And I don't know, maybe the car really does have the hiccups after smoking a Honda Civic with a 5-inch exhaust, one of those rice burners or something. Nah, that wouldn't be it, because my car doesn't eat shit. It is going to be almost impossible to come up with an accurate diagnosis without some type of methodology here, since there are hundreds of things I'm sure that can cause this symptom here. Again, the symptom is an intermittent first gear momentary hesitation. I'm describing it as a hiccup when you take the car off the line. It doesn't matter whether the car is warmed up or not, so I'm really not worried about focusing just on sensors that are used in closed loop mode or something. Closed loop, by the way, means the car is warmed up as opposed to open loop, which means when the car is still warming up and a lot of sensors are not used during that time. So what we want to do is take an approach to our strategy where we brainstorm all the possibilities we can think of, and then I'm going to see if we can eliminate some of those right off the bat and try to narrow down to only the few possibilities that are likely, and those are the ones we're going to spend our time on. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day. And obviously, the whole point of this is to avoid doing the thing that the parts changer is going to do, because by now he would have been on his second bottle of fuel injector cleaner, and after that, what do you think would come next? Of course, plugs and wires all the time. That wouldn't do it. And then he's got a problem on this car, because on this car, the coil would be your next thing, and the coils are expensive on this, and there are 8 of them. Now, of course, your parts changer is smart, right? He's going to only buy 1 coil, and he's going to swap it out with each of the 8 until he eventually thinks he finds the problem, because he's going to save money. We're not going to do that. So let's think of some things. Right off the bat, I can hear everybody out there yelling misfire, and absolutely. Misfire would be at the top of the list. I can tell you that prior to starting the video, I had already checked for that, and it's not going to show to be a misfire. Thus the reason for the video, because I thought it might make an interesting video with the troubleshooting. After that, one of the things I'm thinking, a vacuum leak could definitely cause an issue hesitating off the line. The car's already in a lean condition. Another one that would be a very common one would be a throttle position sensor. That's not going to be the problem on this car, but a throttle position sensor is a really, really typical diagnostic that you would consider, because if you've got a dead spot in the throttle position sensor, then while you are stepping on the gas, the computer thinks that you are letting off the gas, it cuts back fuel, you have an extremely lean condition at that moment in time that you've got the dead spot, and then it picks up again, of course, after the dead spot when it knows that it thinks you've hit the throttle much harder then. So the problem is with a TPS is that that is going to happen regardless of what gear you're in, and my problem is only when I'm in first gear coming off the line. I would also have that hiccup in second and third because the throttle position sensor doesn't care what gear you're in. That dead spot's always going to be the same. But we can do some checks for that anyway. Another explanation would be some type of fuel pressure issue, a low fuel pressure. So when the car is under the heavier load, it is unable to meet, the fuel pressure is unable to meet the demand of the car. Again, the car drives fantastic other than this one momentary blip. I can drive it at wide open throttle all I want and it'll just keep on going. Don't think we're going to have a fuel pressure problem, but an injector issue, like an injector that is not balanced, not giving the same amount of fuel as the other injectors, that's a possibility, so we'll consider that. What else could do this? Real good one, a dirty mass airflow sensor. Or also an improperly functioning manifold pressure sensor, a MAP. So MAP for MAP, reasonable possibilities for slow start off the line. That will be easy to check. And then another one that I was thinking of would be the IAC, Idle Air Control. Again, the problem only happens, and again, it's very intermittent, so I don't think it's going to be an Iac. But if it was more consistent, Iac would be a really good guess, I think, because you are coming up off the line, so your car is at idle, and if it's not closing in time or thinks that it's closed when it isn't, some problem like that, that could certainly cause a stumble. But again, it would be more of a stumble than a hiccup. And the other thing is this problem is so intermittent. Which is really messing things up, the fact that it's intermittent. Of course, if it wasn't intermittent, I'd probably get a check engine light, right? So I think that's about all I can think of right now. You guys probably have some other ideas, and don't worry about it, because if your idea is right, ultimately we're going to find that out at the end of the video, right? So right now, I think this is the troubleshooting that I'm going to go with. So what my plan is now is I'm going to go ahead and hook up my scan tool to the car. I'm going to set up some PIDs that will account for these different criteria that we are examining. And then hopefully I can catch that hiccup on the scan tool, and we can find whatever it is going to be, a lean condition, a rich condition, a misfire, something. We'll find that moment in time that I catch on the scan tool this symptom, and then see if we can see which of these PIDs match up with that symptom and give us a direction to go on. So that's the plan right now. All right, here I was lucky enough to catch the problem in action, and you'll see the intermittence of this. But what we've got is, if we look down here in red, this is my throttle position sensor. So this is me hitting the gas pedal, and the green line is the vehicle speed. So we can see it here. I'm at a dead stop, of course, then hitting the throttle position sensor, hitting the gas pedal to pick up speed. And we can see in general up here with my short-term fuel trims, which I chose as a marker to see if I have a problem. We can see that in general, the short-term trims are hovering around 0, as they should. And then we've got this part here where, again, here I'm off the gas, car is at 0, and then I hit the gas right here, and we can see we get a big spike in the short-term fuel trim in the positive, meaning that the engine went lean. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about fuel trims here. I've got another video. You can look up my video on lean condition diagnosis, where I talk much more in detail about fuel trim. But real briefly, what we're looking at is the engine going lean. So then we can look along down the line, and again here, I'm off the throttle and the car is at 0. I'm hitting the throttle, and we have normal responses on down the line. So again, very intermittent problem here, but this definitely was one of those hiccups. I felt it, and we've got it caught here. So we know that this hiccup is ultimately the result of an excessive lean condition. Anytime we're going over 20, we're certainly concerned, and I would think at 25 you're in danger of getting a code. But of course, remember, to get a check engine code, you're going to have this problem happen in 2 consecutive drive cycles and fairly consistently, and we certainly don't have enough consistency where I expect a check engine light. So, big elephant in the room, was it a misfire at that particular location? And the answer is no. If we look here, this is the freeze at this point in time, and also I can hit play and look for misfires before and after this event, and you can see there are no misfires, and there were no misfires at all during the entire test run. As a matter of fact, we can rule out misfire here. And the other thing is, I did take MAP and MAF readings. I can tell you that those MAP and MAF readings are perfectly normal. I do not suspect a MAP or MAF problem. And I've also got some other data which is going to prove that we don't have an issue here. So let's go back to the board and see what we can rule out and see if we've got a little better direction to go now. All right, as nice as this would be, it is not a misfire. I am absolutely confident of that. So next on the list, vacuum leak. Let's go ahead and show why it is not a vacuum leak right now. This is why we do not have a vacuum leak. We can look here. I don't even remember what the blue line was, but the green line, we've got my throttle position sensor, so me goosing the throttle. Red line is engine RPMs, but the telltale sign here, these are my long-term fuel trims, bank 1 and bank 2, flatlined right along 0. And again, the other video has explanation of what the fuel trims are, but what this is real briefly, the long-term fuel trim, this indicates a percent deviation from normal for a particular condition that the computer has to adjust the fuel delivery, either adding fuel or removing fuel. If the long-term fuel trim were positive at idle, we can see in this area here where at idle, and the fuel trim 0 at idle. If there was a vacuum leak, the long-term fuel trim, because a vacuum leak is an abnormal condition, the long-term fuel trim would have compensated for the vacuum leak by adding fuel. It would have been positive. Conversely, of course, had the engine been running rich, we would have seen a reduction in the fuel injector pulse length, and there would have been less fuel called for by the computer, and we would have seen the number going negative. At 0, this car is running like a new car. There is no adjustment off of normal. There is no vacuum leak. And then there's another thing that I can show here too. And what I wanted to show you here is, well, I don't remember what the green line is. I think that might be the fuel trim, but the red line up here, this is throttle position sensor. So right now I'm at idle, and then I'm flooring the throttle, wide open throttle. We can see here we've got bank 1 oxygen sensor response and bank 2 oxygen sensor response. The green lines are the post-cat. Notice my catalytic converters have good activity, by the way. But what we're interested in is the sine wave here for the bank 1 sensor 1 oxygen sensor and bank 2 sensor 1 oxygen sensor. Both sensors go rich at wide open throttle. And this really helps to rule out that it's a fuel pressure problem. This cannot happen if you've got a weak fuel pump or if you have a lack of fuel delivery. So there's another thing we can rule out. And we've actually got some other things to rule out as well. I think it's time to go back to the drawing board and see where we stand right now. All right, I am going to remove vacuum leak as a possibility based on the long-term fuel trim. We do not have a vacuum leak on this car. It is actually as tight as could possibly be. The other thing that we are going to remove is a fuel pressure problem. We know that there is not an issue with the fuel pressure because of the oxygen sensor response at wide open throttle. I am also going to eliminate a dirty MAF sensor or a MAP sensor problem. How do I know that? Because again, the long-term fuel trim, if we had, and also the oxygen sensor responses, if we had a dirty mass airflow sensor, then that is going to result in a lean condition without the computer, of course, measuring accurately what's coming through the MAF. If the MAF sensor is dirty, then more air is passing by the MAF than what the MAF is actually measuring. That creates a lean condition. Would have shown on the fueled trims. We would have also seen the O2 sensors going lean at wide open throttle because the MAF thinks it's measuring the right amount of air coming in, but it is not. So we know that's not the case. So we are down, let me move this over here, to maybe some type of injector imbalance that's happening at a heavy load. Throttle position sensor, it's not going to be, but we're about to rule that out in just a second. And idle air control. I do not think it's going to be idle air control simply because there's no other idle problems. Unfortunately, I'm not able to pull up PIDs for idle air control on my scan tool. I might be able to. I'll have to check that. And the other thing is that we could look at desired idle speed and actual idle speed, which will also give indication if the Iac is working. But we're making some progress here, I think, unless we overlooked something or unless we did not include something, which is certainly possible. But let's go ahead and take care of this throttle position sensor right now. That's not going to be the problem, again, because it would happen in every gear. That throttle position sensor dead spot, if that's an issue, is going to happen at any particular gear, any particular speed. Granted, this is intermittent, but it's always intermittent under the same conditions, and it does not indicate that a throttle position sensor would be an issue. But let's go ahead and rule it out right now. All right, just wanted to point out that all this time so far, we have not even opened the hood yet or broken out a wrench or gotten our hands dirty. And in my opinion, that's the way it's supposed to be. So let's see if we can get in here. This is going to be throttle position sensor here. We've got an Iac up here. And there's a couple ways we're going to check it. I'm going to check it using a scan tool, but you can also do this with a voltmeter, although it's going to be much easier if you've got some kind of graphing capability. But let me go ahead and set up and we'll show you what we're doing. All right, so I've got my scan tool hooked up, and what we're going to do is just move the throttle here. And again, you can actually do this test without a scan tool. There's a couple ways. Throttle position sensor is just a potentiometer, so it varies resistance as it opens. The most resistance is when the throttle is closed, and then it reduces resistance as you open it. So you can either back probe, and you should see that you increase voltage up to 5 volts maximum as you open the sensor. Another way is you can actually completely remove the sensor from the vehicle, hook it up to an ohm meter, and you will see that you get a steady decrease in resistance as you open the sensor. But again, it's going to be a lot easier to graph it because you're looking for a dead spot. But I'm going to just manually open the throttle, and as I open the throttle, we can see I get a smooth response all the way up and down. And I usually like to go fairly slow and just see. But what we're actually looking for is if there's any dead spots here. And the way that would look, it would look something like this. You would open the throttle, and then you'd have a dead spot like that. And you might even have a couple of them. And at these areas, you would have hesitations. And you should also see them on the way back down. This throttle position sensor is working just fine. Now remember, we've got an intermittent here. So I'm going to do a couple things real quick. I'm just going to take a screwdriver. I'm going to go ahead and max out my voltage here and just tap on the throttle position sensor. See if I can get any loss of signal or anything like that, and nothing. The other thing I'm going to do is just kind of tug on this wire a bit here, and again, no problems with throttle position sensor, and I didn't expect as much because it only happened under certain specific conditions. So we're going to rule out throttle position sensor at this point. All right, sorry for talking over the engine, but unfortunately I don't have any of the PIDs that I really want. What I really want is a desired Iac position, and then of course the Iac position. I can tell you at idle, this value of 60 counts is normal, and what I want to do is go ahead and rev the engine up, see that the idle air is moving, the idle air motor is moving and returning back to about this at idle. So let's see what happens. All right, that looks good, and it's quickly moving back, and as long as it gets around where it was before, I'm pretty happy with that. I don't think this is an idle air control motor position, even though I don't have the desired position. The other thing, interestingly enough, I don't have a desired idle speed on this one either. This is actually a different scan tool than the auto tap that I use. This one has a little more powerful features, but it's not going to help me very much in this case, except that it does give enough information that I'm satisfied with this. This is not an Iac issue. Let's go back to the board, see what we can rule out. All right, that was not exactly what I was hoping for. Again, you know, I've got like a $300 scan tool as opposed to a $5,000 scan tool, so I can't really pick up the PIDs I want, but I did get enough information. First of all, we know the TPS is not an issue, so we're going to take that off. The other thing with the Iac, granted, again, I didn't have the right PIDs, but there's two things. First of all, I know my car really well, and I know that that idle air control position was within spec. That was what I was looking for. The other thing is that while I also didn't have a desired idle speed, I know that the desired idle speed is 800 RPM, and we were right around there, and it returned very quickly. We didn't have any indication of a Iac issue. So I'm not going to erase that, but because we didn't get to really thoroughly eliminate it as a possibility, let's just cross it out for right now. We may revisit this. But what I'm back to now is what my original theory was, and that is some type of injector imbalance. And fortunately, I do have a way I know that I can test this. So let's see if, again, it's not going to be enough that it causes a misfire, but maybe it's just, you know, under heavy load, an inefficiency or inequality with the injectors is causing this little mishap. Now, why it would be intermittent is a really good question. It probably wouldn't be, but it is a possibility, and I'm kind of down to my last one. So let's go ahead and do an injector balance test and see if we can find any indication of an issue here. Okay, fuel injector balance test. So we're going to do this with a scan tool. However, there actually are ways you can do this without a scan tool. You can buy special little gizmos that will do what the computer is going to do here, and you basically need two things. You need a fuel pressure gauge, which I have hooked up right here. One of the many reasons, by the way, I like working on GM cars is they always have Schrader valves on the fuel rail, which makes this so much easier when you do fuel pressure checks and things. I hate working on Hondas and Toyotas. They typically do not have the Schrader valve, and if you don't have the right adapter, it really complicates matters. So this is going to be much easier because we've got a GM car. And also you'll need a way of firing independently each injector for a very accurate known amount of time and number of pulses. Going to be easy with my computer to do that, but if you're going to try to do this by hand by applying 12 volts to the injectors exactly the same amount each time, good luck with that. But they do have special tools available for this. But the idea here is actually pretty simple. What we're going to do is the computer is going to pressurize the fuel rail by priming the fuel pump for a few seconds, and that's going to get us full fuel pressure in the rail. This is a test that's done without the engine running. And then when the rail is pressurized, it is going to fire a fuel injector individually for approximately 50 pulses for a millisecond per pulse or so. You can actually adjust it, and that's going to be a fixed amount of time that the injector is opening and closing. And of course, with the injector opening and closing and without the engine running to keep the fuel pressure up, the fuel pressure will drop, but it's going to drop an exact amount because we're firing that injector an exact number of times for a length of time. What we're going to do then is, again, take note of that reading, reprime the fuel system, and then fire the next injector. And that injector is going to fire, again, the same exact amount of time as the first injector, and we should see an exactly identical drop in fuel pressure for every injector that we do this test on. So that's the theory here. So let's go ahead and run this. So the first thing that's going to happen, I need to initiate this test, and there's my list of injectors up there. And let's make sure you can see the fuel gauge, because the real action is with the fuel pressure gauge here. So we're going to go ahead and initiate this test on injector number 1. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to prime the fuel pump just to make sure that we've got a loaded up fuel system and accurate baseline. So just prime the fuel pump now, and now it's going to fire the injector. Exactly 34 psi. So what we need to do is run this on the next injector, and we should end up at, again, exactly 34 psi. If we're even off a couple psi, that's going to be a concern, because fuel injectors are incredibly accurate and consistent when they're working properly. So let's go ahead and do injector number 2, see what happens. Okay, computer just primed up number 2, and it should be firing, and there it goes. And we are right at 34 again, exactly 34. So obviously you see the idea here. We are going to go through all 8 injectors, and they all should end up exactly at 34. One other nice thing about this test, you can't really mess it up. It only fires each injector one time. One of the concerns with this is you don't want to fill up the cylinders with gasoline by repeating this test too much on any one cylinder. So it's got a lot of things that make this really easy as opposed to doing it by hand. And the best part of it, of course, is you don't have to unplug each injector one at a time to get to them if you were going to do this test using like a special tool. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off for you, and I'll come back when I get the results.